Hi chickens, I hope you're all doing well. Summer has arrived in the UK, as you can see. It's absolutely glorious today. And I thought while I was having a quick break after doing a house cleansing that I would talk to you guys about creativity in magic and ritual, and a little bit about my own journey with that premise. When I first became interested in magic and witchcraft, I obviously, as I think most of us did, picked up a lot of books and started reading quite heavily. And I started looking at different spells and rituals that other people had put together and what they recommended, and recommendations for setting out an altar and all of that kind of thing. And as I think I've discussed on the channel before in previous videos, Wicca was kind of the predominant thing that I was learning about because it was very accessible. When I was a young witchling, going on the internet and purchasing books off the internet and kind of allowing your research to run away with you and trying to find stuff that really fit what you were looking for. I mean, first of all, I was kind of too young to do that. I was like 12 or 13. And secondly, it kind of wasn't the done thing like it is now. I don't even think you had Amazon at that time or anything like that. I'm really betraying my age here. So I would go to bookshops, and when you go to bookshops, there are all of these books on Wicca, Wicca 101 kind of books, and very little on anything else. And even though I was aware that, you could be kind of more eclectic, you didn't have to stick to what was provided for you in these books, I didn't know until much later on my journey the extent of how creative you could be in your magical path, and the extent of how much off the beaten track you could go, that you really could kind of be a magical maverick, and you could take what spoke to you and you could really embrace what it was about magic that flicked your particular switch. For example, I didn't really feel inspired by the idea of an altar space for quite a few years back there, because I was kind of exposed to all of these ideas of what an altar should look like and what should be on it and what each of the tools mean and what the correspondences are, and how to work it all out according to what these books were telling me. And that kind of stuff didn't really click with me. It wasn't really my flavour. But it was difficult at that age to kind of think outside the box and to think about what it was that I would like and what it was that would make me feel like the most potent spiritual being I could possibly be. So it's really about giving yourself that permission, I think. And I think part of the reason that I couldn't do that at first was obviously because of my youth. But I think another part of the reason I couldn't do it is because I suppose it kind of seemed like a massive undertaking to sit down and really think, okay, what kind of witch am I? What kind of thing really speaks to me? What kind of ritual do I want to do? And when you're quite multifaceted, and when lots of different things that you read and lots of different things that you hear actually speak to you, it can sometimes be difficult to work out what it is that you want to put together and how it's all going to work. It kind of feels a little bit like building your own religion, because in a sense that's what it is. And it seems like you have to make all of these big decisions and you have to kind of think very seriously about it. And so in a way that kind of sucks the fun out of it to an extent, and you feel like it's a massive responsibility. So I think that might have been another reason why it kind of seemed like a daunting task and something that I couldn't really do. But I knew that a lot of the stuff I was reading in books didn't really sit with me correctly and wasn't really what I wanted to do with my altar space, and it wasn't what I wanted to do in ritual. I read a lot of things about calling the corners and working with the elements, and that kind of thing as well didn't really speak to me. It wasn't really something that I personally felt inspired by. And I didn't want to use other people's spells and other people's kind of ritual layouts. I wanted to write my own, and I maybe needed to give myself permission in that way as well, to actually write my own and to actually decide what kind of thing would really give me the most potency and would really link me into the ideas I was thinking of. So all of this stuff is quite big stuff when you're young. It's big stuff when you're a teenager. And I've had a really interesting and epic journey with it. And I feel now like I'm at this point in my spiritual path, and have been for a few years, where I can really allow myself to jump into the waters, jump into the psychic depths, and bring out the archetypes and the ideas and the symbols and the colours and the particular atmospheres that I really want. And I can kind of gracefully tie them together, and I can make something that I feel is really powerful and really important to me. Another thing I wanted to mention was books of shadows and books of mirrors, particularly books of shadows. I think that there are a lot of people who start a book of shadows and they get really into it and they start copying all of this information about, you know, the various things that are necessary in a book of shadows, that people feel are necessary, like the elemental associations, the different tools, the 8 points on the wheel of the year, the reed if you're a Wiccan, that kind of stuff. And I think people go off it because they don't really allow themselves to place their own depths into that book, or to kind of make it their own in a way that requires that sense of internal permission to do so. And it kind of seems like it's some sort of school textbook. It feels kind of rigid and strict, and as though it doesn't really have much of you in it. And I think you can get past that by decorating it and stuff like that, but I think really what it takes is to put things in your own language and to put things in your own way, and not to maybe do so much copying from websites or from books or whatever, but actually to write down your thoughts and write down what your key principles are, how you want to approach things, your ideas about structure. I think that's why the Book of Mirrors became so popular with a lot of people, because it's almost like that's the place where you do that. That's the spiritual journal. It's where you allow that stream of consciousness to come out. But I think that it's really important not to make the Book of Shadows feel dead. It's important that the Book of Shadows feels like it's yours and feels like it has that depth to it and feels like it's connected to you. It's connected to your sense of who you are as a witch. I had a Book of Shadows myself that I kind of was really rigid about it, and I've certainly never had a Book of Shadows where I felt like everything had to be written out in this really formulaic structure. So you start with really basic things like your elements and you know, your principles, your guidelines, whatever, and then go on into kind of your matron and patron. I didn't feel it had to be like that, because I kind of felt like, well, I already know that stuff. That stuff's already in my head. I've had that stuff in my head for years. So for me, like, there's no point in writing it down. The only reason that I would have for writing it down is if I was going to pass my Book of Shadows on to somebody who was going to learn from me, like an apprentice or whatever, or in the future if my children wanted to get into witchcraft, they'd be able to look back and see it. But as that's not my motivation, and as that's not something that I'm concerned about, it never really made sense for me to do that whole kind of school book, lay everything out kind of thing. So I've never done that. But I definitely approached the Book of Shadows from a really rigid place. Like, I told myself that everything had to be perfect in it. And as a result of that, it kind of felt dead to me. And so I don't really use it anymore. Whereas the Book of Mirrors, for me, is alive. The Book of Mirrors is really my magical record book. And that book is where I feel like I can really flow, and I feel like I can really get in the zone. And that book has become, in a way, much more valuable to me because I wasn't so precious over it, because I allowed it to be the mirror of my magical and spiritual and ritual journey. And as a result of that, it's become really important to me, and it is a very potent reference book, I think, for the future when I want to look back. So I think it's important just not to be too rigid, and I think it's important to make everything feel like it's yours and really be with it. You know, don't worry about what it looks like or how full it is or what you might have missed out of it or whatever. If you're writing down things in it because you feel like you need to, because you know that it's what other people have in their books of shadows or whatever, but you're kind of thinking, why am I writing this? Because I've known all of this stuff for years and it's not really anything that I need to remember or refresh myself on. Don't write it. Don't write that stuff down. You know, really allow yourself to write down what speaks to you and write it down in a way that is in alignment with who you are, rather than taking it from a book, or rather than, you know, just pressurizing yourself into making it something that you don't want it to be. Because that's how you finish things, and finishing things, as Neil Gaiman once said, finishing things is where you learn from. That's where you learn from. You learn by finishing, and you learn by finishing and looking back over. And so when things are left half finished because things don't feel, you know, fully in alignment with you, then it is frustrating, and that's when things do get a bit difficult. Creativity for me is one of the most essential components, one of the most important things in my magical and ritual practice. I need to be allowed to play. I need to be allowed to feel like everything I'm doing is connected to who I am. And as a result of that, I have worked very hard to notice what works for me, and to notice where I get results, and to notice when things feel potent, and when things feel full, and when things feel alive, when things feel pregnant with potential. And I think that's one reason why it's important to keep a magical record book, to keep a Book of Shadows or Book of Mirrors, or a place where you write down what your responses have been to the rituals that you did, or what the consequences have been for the spells that you cast, etc. I think it's important to keep noticing what works and to keep applying more of that in your practice, and to notice what didn't work so well. And I think that's an argument that I've seen a few witches use when it comes to things like making your book of shadows really perfect and writing everything down perfectly and kind of making everything feel like it's gospel and like it's placed under glass. There's a danger with that, because if you write out a very complex ritual or an elaborate spell that you're going to do and you write it all out in your book of shadows, as though it's kind of like set in stone and, you know, it is the perfect recipe, that can get difficult if it turns out that it's actually not the perfect recipe, that something was a little off with it, or that in the future you do want to try something different and it works better. I think that's why it's important to have this book that is alive, that is scrappy, that is full of like new notes that you've stapled in over time or highlighted, or, you know, things like that, where it feels like it's a working recipe book, that you're constantly improving on it, rather than having all these things kind of set in stone and then realising that there is something more potent out there, there's something that really drove you to that next plateau, and then feeling like you need to go back and you need to change things and whatnot. I think that's why quite a lot of witches these days favour ring binders, actually, because it gives you that chance to go back and actually correct things that you have found another way of doing, or that kind of feel like they speak to you more. So that's one idea that I would definitely set out. But in terms of things like being creative and finding your own path, I just think that that's the joy path. That is the joy path. That's where you find your bliss. Creating something which is truly yours, which truly feels marvellous to you, and which reflects who you are as a person and the evolutions that you go through, the changes that you go through in your spiritual journey. Your path always needs to respect that. And if you are clinging too tightly to a way of doing things, and you are kind of forcing yourself to carry on with something that you have already established and already set into motion, so you feel like you can't betray it or you can't break from it, that's where you start to actually be responsible for stagnating your own journey. You are responsible for kind of not allowing yourself to evolve. And I think it's really important to just note that, you know, the path itself, the stuff that you set into motion, the things that you try, the words that you say, the deities you work with, you know, all of that stuff is just a point in time. That stuff doesn't need to be set in stone. You know, the idea is to constantly evolve, constantly learn, constantly push yourself, challenge yourself, test your boundaries, and explore your comfort zone, dance around the edges of your comfort zone. Notice when something organically has changed in you, which is kind of drawing you into something new about the path, and respect that. Don't let that scare you. Respect it, work with it, go with it, flow with it, surrender to it. And it will take you into so many new spheres of influence, and it will take you down so many new avenues. It will open new doors for you. And again, that's where you learn from. You know, when you put something into place and you say, this is what I am, or this is what I do, you're really restricting yourself in a lot of ways, because you are inevitably going to change and you are going to make new discoveries. You're going to read new things that seem to switch you on or plug you into something that you've been thinking for a while, or things are going to feel dull, things are going to feel, you know, a little bit rigid sometimes, and you are going to want to jump out of that box, and you're going to tell yourself that you're not allowed to. And I think that's why I've said some of the things that I've said about labels on the channel over the years, or 2 years, whatever, that I've been on YouTube. I think that labels can be great as identifiers, as ways of categorising things, but I think that faithfulness, that rigidity, that loyalty that we have to labels can be something destructive when we're trying to grow, when we're trying to spread our wings. I think when you are growing your wings and you're spreading your wings out and you somehow feel entrapped, the cage that you are stuck in, that you can't get your wings out through, that's the label, that's the insistence that you have upon maintaining this thing that you've created, when in fact the thing that you've created doesn't house you very well anymore, and it's okay to fly free. It's okay to do that. And that's why I always advise people that are new to the path not to take too faithfully and too quickly to a label straight away, but instead to just allow the flow, allow the practice, and notice what works, notice what really seems to align itself with you. With magic, this is particularly important, right, because we expect results from our spellcraft. We need to understand which techniques and which ideas, which flavours we actually work most potently as a witch, which ones align ourselves with us most fully, which ones work in different situations, which one did we seem to have great results with for different kinds of thing. You know, all that kind of stuff matters. I think it's important to let yourself experiment, of course, and I think it's important to just note where things came together and be okay with that. Be okay with that, and know that you can only get better at that, and you can only allow yourself to challenge your own perceptions of what magic really is all the more, and that's when it really starts to become a really potent force in your life, is when you let yourself do that. So for me, creativity is more important than tradition. For me, creativity is bringing me to the circle. I'm bringing me to the circle. I'm bringing what I love to the circle. And a few things that I really enjoy doing are my daily devotionals, my daily meditation practice, lighting candles for remembrance, commemoration, sending positive energies to people, that kind of stuff. That's daily stuff that I love to do, that really aligns itself with who I am. And in terms of ritual and magical structure, I really enjoy using art. I really enjoy using words in automatic writing. Scrying speaks to me pretty good. I love that stuff. I love losing myself. I love astral travel, that kind of thing. With magic, I like to write my spells from scratch, and I like to think very carefully about the different associations and correspondences or tools or words that I'm going to use. Words to me seem like a really important part of the process. For me, words are something that is key, and I've learned so much in the last year about how to make words work for me, and what the limitations are when you use language in spellcraft, and how to actually get through that, how to find the loopholes, how to understand how my language and my conviction and my belief in what I'm using with my language can affect, can expand, or can limit how I manifest what I want to manifest. I think that's really interesting, particularly with stuff like healing and abundance and matters like that, matters of that nature. The words that I choose can be very reflective of my resistance or allowance to the outcome, and they can form limitations, or they can allow me to be expansive. It really depends. All you've got to do is tweak a few words and it becomes a whole different spell. It becomes a whole different intention. It gives a whole new level of potential. This is something that I've learned, and that really excites me as well. I like to set up my altar in accordance with how I'm feeling, in accordance with my ideas about myself and my spiritual path, in accordance with what I want to look at that would most drive me to challenge myself spiritually, or to feel at one with myself spiritually. So, you know, the whole thing that I realised as I got older about being able to have an altar which really reflects you and speaks to you was really important information for me, and was a really important jump in my own spiritual journey, knowing that my altar is my space, that I don't need to take anybody else's suggestions, that I don't need to make it look a certain way. That was really important for me, and something that it was really majestic to learn. It suddenly threw me into this whole new level of expanse, this whole new terrain, where I realised that my spiritual centre point in the material realm, that place where I go to meditate, that place where I go to attune and ground and centre and get ready to do spellcraft and work powerful spellcraft, that kind of stuff, realising that it could reflect who I was as a person, as a woman, as a witch, as a spiritual being, was marvellous for me, and it made me feel so much more in touch. So I really recommend, if you're feeling a little bit at odds with your altar at the moment, or you feel like it's not looking how you want it to look, or, you know, if you do have that material focus point like I do and like a lot of witches do, really reassess it and really make it your own. Because I love doing that, and I love changing it up for the 8 points on the wheel of the year, and I love just clicking into that moment. It's so much like sand play therapy. It's so much like trying to work out, okay, what does this mean to me right now? What does this mean to me? What do I want to say? What do I want to click into which reflects what's going on internally? For me, the preparation of the altar and the setup of the altar is very much in touch with that axiom, as above, so below, you know, as within, so without. That's what it is to me. It's a picture, it's a reflection, and I really enjoy playing with that concept. That is great for me. So I really enjoy using art in magic. That's really important for me. I really enjoy using a box. I like to cut up words and pictures and things like that that reflect what I want to bring into my life, and I place it all into a box. I cast the spell over that box. I protect it with energy, and then I enjoy returning to that. You know, you'll quite often over time, if you see my altar space and things like that, you'll often see a box of some kind on it, and that is a magic box, literally. Like, that is where I put my intentions, that's where I create my little atmosphere that I want to bring into the tangible realm, and then I will consistently charge it, I will consistently work ritual around it, it will consistently become more potent and more energized, and I'll put more of my dedication into it. So it's not just about the original spell, it's about keeping that stuff in my mind afterwards. I like that quite a lot. I think that works for me quite well. I love using the cut-ups technique, which is very popular in beat literature and in some areas of the artistic community. whereby you will just create sentences, like garbled sentences, out of cut up bits of different books and magazines and stuff, and see what comes out of that. For me, that's a way of connecting with the divine, in a sense. I like to translate and interpret what's come to me in the moment. I cast out my circle and I just request messages from source, from spirit, and then I get into this exercise and it gets really interesting, really complex, really detailed. And it's almost like fractures and fragments of messages from cosmos just come to me and arrange themselves in these patterns, and that can be so illuminating for me. I love that, and that in turn can, you know, take me down different avenues, remind me of different things that I want to learn that I'm not yet adept at, or it can just bring me home to myself. It really does bring me home to myself. So that's another thing that I like to do. I really like spontaneity in magic and ritual too. I don't think that everything needs to be massively scripted and massively planned out. I enjoy that spontaneity of letting something take me. I enjoy just doing a very simple manifestation intention, just pure, just raw, just there, right in this moment. I'm going to choose these words and let it be so, and show me what you've got. I love that. And I enjoy, you know, making arrangements of things, like arrangements of flowers in the woods, or I enjoy kind of making little patterns, little symbols that show that, yes, I've been here, and yes, I was connected to the moment when I was here. And it's almost like leaving little footprints of myself everywhere. I sometimes leave notes, like just little inspirational quotations on buses or on restaurant tables, or, you know, wherever I am, between the pages of books in the library, that kind of stuff. And I think this is a way of working magic. This is a way of connecting dots. This is a way of actively changing something in the cosmos. Every little thing that I do, every trace of me that I put into the universe can define my connection to the universe and my belief in what the universe really is. Holy, divine, oneness. All the time, every time I do that, it can plug me into this sense of myself, and it is magic in action. It is me putting something into being. That kind of anonymous art vibe, I love that too. And being a witch and working magic and doing ritual has plugged me into this sense that everything on some level is so magical, and everything is about directing energy, and everything is about will, everything is about intention. Everything can be so conscious. I can eat consciously, I can get dressed consciously, I can talk to people more consciously, I can understand what I'm saying and the effect it's having and the different ways that it could inspire people to affect change in their own lives. So everything, in a sense, then becomes a magical act. And I know that seems complex, and I know it seems like, you know, it's different from magic with a K, as we would say. But in a way, being a witch has enhanced my pantheism to such a level, because I realised that actually magic runs through everything. My response to everything can be about getting that energetic click. And so I do even the smallest things with so much good intention. You know, when I cook, I place intention into the food. I'm mindful, and I'm almost directing my energy organically as a natural response to being alive. And that's something that being a witch for such a very long time has taught me and has clicked me into, even without effort. And I love that. So, you know, I think this video ended up being something different to what it was maybe supposed to be about initially, but I would just say that it's really important to bring you to the magic that you do, and it's important to bring you into the ritual space. And it's okay, I think, to combine and to mish and mash different influences and different inspirations, as long as it feels right to you, as long as it's connecting you to your core and your sense of what you want to actually bring into being, what you want to manifest on your terms. I think that's really what it should be about. And for me, I have brought a lot of my passions, a lot of my loves, a lot of my ideas about what's great aesthetically, what's really pleasing to look at, you know, what's pleasing to hear, what music's pleasing to hear, what poetry's pleasing to read, what kind of word combinations do I like, what kind of art plugs me into the majesty of who I am as a magical being. All of those things I've brought into my space. I don't leave that stuff outside the circle. I bring it into the circle. I make art in the circle. I cast a circle sometimes to sleep, and I ask great archetypal big dreams to come to me, and they do. You know, crystals inspire me. I've brought them in. Tarot inspires me. I've brought that in. But I've also brought a lot of stuff in that doesn't seem like it should technically be magical, doesn't seem like it would appear in any kind of book. You know, like kids' toys, doing psychometry with kids' toys, stuff like that. I really think, you know, if it speaks to you, do it. If it's what really interests you, do it. I really think about how my consciousness works. and what I like to look at, what I like to be a part of, what stuff really makes the hairs on my arms stand up. And that's what I'm there for, and that's what I'm doing all the time. And the more you get unapologetic about that, and the more you understand how much it really matters to do that, then you start to realise that there are these untapped seas, oceans of potential inside of you, and you start swimming down through them, and that's where stuff gets really interesting. That's where it really becomes illuminating. That's where it becomes dark and golden and wild and joyful. And I suppose that's all I really wanted to say for today. Much love, fellow witches. Blessed be.